Hi, I'm Ania, and this is Somewhere on Earth, the Global Tech Podcast, and it's Tuesday, November the 4th, 2025. After the machines took over the show last week, we are back to real people. We'll be hearing about how 10 million social media posts confirm what many people have already suspected. Fake news travels faster than the truth. Also this week, we'll be looking at how new laws to stop children viewing inappropriate websites online are having an impact. Many countries across Europe now have implemented age verification processes for sites with pornography, for instance. But is this working? Or is the rise of VPNs showing that many people are simply bypassing the law? All this on Somewhere on Earth, the Global Tech Podcast this week. Now, if you spent any time on social media, and let's be honest, who hasn't, you've probably had this feeling. You look at your feed and it seems perfectly reasonable, perhaps leaning a little to the left or to the right, but generally normal. Then you venture on comments of a news site, or heaven forbid, you see what a relative or friend is posting on a different platform, and it feels like you've landed on another planet. We all intuitively know that these online echo chambers exist, where our own views are reflected back at us. But for a long time, it's been a bit of a gut feeling. Well, now we have the evidence. A new study published in the journal PNAS has analysed over 10 million news sharing posts across 7 different platforms to finally map out how our political biases and the quality of the information we share interact online. To help us break down the findings and to figure out what we can actually do about it, we're joined by lead researcher Professor Mohsen Mosleh from the Oxford Internet Institute.
We have large number of social media platforms which are different from different perspectives, things like user base, content moderation policy, and governance. So it's not clear when we find a pattern in one particular platform generalizing to other platforms. Is it something that we found about one platform specific to that platform, or is it a universal thing? So that makes us to the questions of the engagement with news across all these platforms. So if we take a piece of news and we look at the engagement pattern across all these platforms, do we find a consistent pattern, or do we find heterogeneous pattern specific to one platform compared to the other?
So you looked at 7 different platforms, is that right? Yes. 10 million yes. Posts, 7 different platforms. We're talking X, Twitter, LinkedIn, Gab, Mastodon. There were some I hadn't even heard of, but the views expressed on these platforms are very different, aren't they?
Yeah, it is. So we choose platforms from across the political spectrum, and also emerging platforms where we have the ability to collect public posts from the individuals. So this contains X, which is a widely used platform, mostly in the US and also in Europe. But we also consider other emerging platforms like Mastodon, which is a distributed environment of different servers. So everyone can set up their own server and connect it to the ecosystem called Fediverse, as well as Blue Sky, which is another emerging platform which many people from the left joined following leaving Twitter after Elon Musk took over. And then on the other hand, we have more right-leaning platforms like Gab, Getter, and Truth Social. These are mostly platforms that people who are not happy with common practices of content moderation on bigger platforms choose to use. So we wanted to cover a range of platforms with different user composition in terms of political lean, as well as content moderation policy and the way the platforms are governed. Things like whether it's a centralized platform like X versus a more decentralized platform like Mastodon and Fediverse.
And what did you find? Because reading your paper, you can see that platforms like Gab, like True Social, the more extreme right platforms, appear to have lower quality news, don't they?
They do. I mean, the thing is that the first thing that we did was we took a list of 11,000 news domains. These are the news domains we have the political lean for, as well as a measure for their quality. So for each domain, we have a quantities from 0 and 1 provided by professional fact checkers, journalists, and academic people, where higher numbers shows like higher quality content, and lower numbers represent lower quality content. And then we look at the volume of these posts across these platforms, like posts that contain news links to them from the rated list of domains that we have. And what we found was that, as you mentioned briefly, platforms where include users from the right happen to have lower quality content as far as the quality of the news shared on this platform. And platform on the left include links to news outlet that professional fact checkers found more trustworthy.
So let me get this clear. So the extreme right sites, they had lower quality news content, so less trustworthy, more likely to be misinformation. The extreme left, on the other hand, was that the same or was that higher quality?
We are talking about on average here.
Okay.
So platforms that are on average have more users from right-leaning side of the political spectrum. They have lower quality content being shared, whereas platform on the left, which includes platforms like X, Blue Sky, and Mastodon, they on average have higher quality content. So we just like averages at the platform level across all the users who might be like extreme or kind of like in the center or so. It's very difficult with a data set that we have to tease apart who are like extreme versus moderate right and left, but we are talking about the on average use of platform as far as the political lean of the user is concerned.
Now, the most worrying finding, I think, that is that everywhere you look, post-linking lower quality news consistently seem to get more engagement, more likes, more shares and comments. Even platforms that don't have engagement optimizing algorithms. Why do you think this kind of junk food, this rubbish for the brain, seems to be more shareable by people?
Sure. I mean, what we found here is something along with the previous studies. There's this large study back in 2018 by a group of colleagues at MIT where they found that fake news is shared more and they travel faster and deeper within the network. What we did here was that look at the news quality and we found like similar pattern. That is like news with lower qualities shared more across the political spectrum. And one of the hypotheses here is that lower quality content by definition is more novel. That is, people fabricate this kind of content to receive more engagement, whereas high quality content is mostly focused on facts, which sounds boring to people, so they may less likely to be engaged with them.
Now, all in all, you did find that high quality news is still the majority of what people see and share. But it's just the lower quality stuff seems to be more viral. So is the situation as dire as it sometimes seems?
So, I mean, on one hand, like majority of the content on this platform is high quality. So that's a good thing. That's the good news. But on the other hand, even those little part of the content that's low quality, they receive more engagement. That's the part that we are worried about. So fake news, hyperpartisan content, low quality content is very little, but those little are problematic in a sense that people are more likely to share them, like them. So there's a kind of like a paradox here.
What about the platforms themselves, though, for policymakers, for us as users? What's the single most important takeaway from your research? Where should we be directing our efforts to create a healthier information system?
Sure. I mean, there are a variety of things that platforms are doing, and some of them are very helpful. So something like systems like community nodes or like using the crowd for fact-checking content could be one. That is something that X has leveraged and is a promising practice, as well as meta platforms are moving toward that goal. Some problematic policy that people from major platforms recently started to uh, implement is getting rid of professional fact checkers, which I think is not a good practice. That can complement the crowd decisions in terms of content moderation. Another thing that also is helpful is using the AI for fact checking, which has lots of promise, but at the same time, it's not a silver bullet to all the problematic content. That's like we still need professional fact checkers. So one particular example is that like AI is not good at fact checking breaking news because there's something that the AI didn't see the data, didn't get trained on. So it could be like very problematic, and like those are the cases like professional fact checkers can help a lot. On the other hand, also platforms can align their algorithm that focus on accuracy of the content versus like things that they just want more generating revenue, or like things that through which they can sell more ads and so on. So platform have the power to move people's attention toward accuracy as opposed to other things that people might get engaged on social media, which includes like all these low quality fake news websites.
Professor Mohsen Mosleh there. Thank you so much for popping our bubble, or at least for helping us understand it on Somewhere on Earth. Now, we did our Machines Take Over the Show episode last week, and we've had a few comments. Adam Collins on Facebook said, I was pleasantly surprised at how listenable it was. The intonation was very natural compared to previous AI I've heard, though the female host was slightly quick at times, and both hosts didn't do exclamation well. It felt like the AI was trying to make the conversation very evenly distributed between the hosts, which felt a bit unnatural. It would be interesting to see if it would still be coherent and nuanced if you fed in more basic source material, such as giving it a couple of news articles about the same subject into it and asked it to summarise and discuss. Well, that's certainly one thing we were thinking about doing, Adam, is actually putting in our sources that we would use originally, and any notes we might take with researchers from phone interviews or Zoom interviews we might be doing, and see what happens there. So watch this space. We're going to try and do that episode in the coming weeks and months. Now, also, we've had some emails about the show, and the general feeling was that it was eerily convincing. One listener, who wanted to remain anonymous, said, if I had heard this as a podcast I'd not listened to before, I may not have noticed it was done by AI, and that is quite sobering. It certainly was quite sobering, and please keep your comments and questions coming in to @SoapTech on most social media platforms, and hello@somewhereonearth.co if you would like to email us. Now, we've mentioned on the show before a big rise in the use of VPNs in the UK. Now, that seems to correlate with the implementation of the Online Safety Act. It appears that this new law has also led to a dramatic drop in traffic to regulated adult sites, as much as 77%, reported by one major site. France has introduced a similar law, and in Italy, one comes into effect next week. But what is really happening? Are these laws really this effective in blocking access to adult sites? Well, we're not convinced, and neither is Sam Woodhams, VPN Managing Editor at TechRadar. I firstly asked Sam to explain more about the laws themselves.
So the Online Safety Act in the UK has been around for seemingly forever, for a good few years of debate and deliberation, and finally came into force earlier this year. And it stipulates that websites containing content that is deemed to be only appropriate for adults should implement an age verification system. So that means that children aren't inadvertently, as Ofcom often likes to say, kind of stumbling across this sort of content. So now on a lot of adult websites there's age verification steps, which means that to access it you have to provide some sort of ID or biometric information. There's a bunch of different ways of proving you're as old as you say you are, and then that allows entry into the website.
And adult sites might not necessarily mean pornography, because I think a lot of people just assume it's stuff of a sexual nature. But it's even things like pimple popping websites, for instance. Things that perhaps aren't the prettiest to see, but aren't necessarily what most people think. So there is quite a broad spectrum there, isn't there? Violence as well.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the main kind of concerns that people have around these issues is mission creep and what is determined to be unsafe or unsuitable for children. I actually saw one of the comments on my most recent article was someone saying they're a 45-year-old man who's been playing video games for as long as they can remember, and now all of a sudden they've got to provide their credit card information to continue playing the games that they downloaded years ago. Wow. So it's issues around games, social media, any content that is deemed to be kind of unsuitable for children. And I think that's one of the major issues is where kind of deliberation and transparency around those decisions are being made, as much as the need for age verification in the first place.
And you've certainly been writing about this for TechRadar, and you've been in this field for a very long time. And on the surface, it does kind of look as though, traffic to these sites is down. I mean, the numbers are quite staggering. Tell me what the numbers are and tell me what is actually happening.
Yeah, so a lot of the big porn websites have registered a massive decrease in traffic from the UK. And I think you could be quick to say that that's a kind of win, that the legislation has worked effectively. It's preventing children and other people from accessing this sort of content. But in actual fact, it's likely that the traffic is pretty similar. It's just that the traffic's no longer coming from the UK, because people will be using VPNs to bypass the age restrictions just by connecting to a country where the Online Safety Act or another similar law doesn't apply, and accessing the content that way. So traffic might be down from UK IP addresses, but from other IP addresses with countries that haven't got these laws, it may have actually increased.
And I'm sure many of our listeners use VPNs regularly, either just for their own personal security or because they are in a country where certain content can't be accessed because it is restricted by the authorities. And just to kind of explain to people how the VPN works, can you remind us?
Sure. So you're connecting to a different server. So it's a hop gap in your internet connection between you and the website. It's diverted to another server, which can be in another country, which is why it allows you to access potentially blocked content. And it encrypts your internet traffic on the way to that VPN server, which means your ISP can't access what you're doing online.
So you seem to suddenly be in, I don't know, Chile, and you're actually sat in West London, yeah?
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah, exactly.
But, I mean, we've joked about this before on the programme, saying, oh, look, #1 in the Play Store, suddenly VPN apps. So this apparent drop in people visiting adult sites in the UK has seemed to be kind of counterbalanced by a sudden rise in the use of VPNs.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the big companies, Proton VPN, registered an increase of something like 1,400% of downloads.
Wow.
Another report has said that around 10 million VPNs were downloaded in the first half of this year. So there's definitely this counterbalance of increase in demand for VPN apps. And I think also what's important to note is, for the people that maybe aren't using VPN apps but still want to access this content, there are websites that aren't complying with the law. And I think that's where it gets, like with VPNs, potentially quite risky, because people are accessing content from unregulated platforms and potentially using unregulated and untrustworthy apps as well.
Well, that's it, isn't it? Not every VPN is a good VPN, is it?
Yeah, exactly. And there have been, there've been reports of VPNs kind of monitoring your data. You're switching trust from your ISP to whoever the VPN company is. So it's worth making sure that you trust that they're going to do protect your data well and not snoop on what you're doing online. Because what you might be doing is inadvertently making your data kind of more at risk than not.
That is quite a worry. So definitely use a bona fide VPN if you're going on VPN, is I think the take-home message, isn't it? But the UK isn't the only country. I know France has got a similar law, and Italy has literally, in the last few days, put this in place, haven't they?
Yeah, it's becoming quite a kind of global phenomenon, I think. Some American states as well have introduced this sort of measure before. France, like you said, and Italy, comes into force mid-November, I think, later this month. And they've adopted quite an interesting approach, which seems to be slightly more privacy friendly than what we've got here in the UK. So they separate the verification process in two. So you go to a third party to authenticate that you're old enough. You then receive a token from that authenticator that you then share with the website. Basically what it means is you're not sharing all of your data with one party. So you're not giving the website all of your birth date and all your biometric information. You're giving that to one company and then using that token to access the website. So it splits it in half. It's called a zero knowledge system that should help kind of protect your privacy and data security.
That certainly sounds like quite a sensible idea, because I think the thought of me, putting in my birth date, etc., and private biometric information, because some of them use things like face scans, don't they? So to access, half jokingly, but pimple popping websites, or sorry, I was watching them with my husband last night for far too long. It's an obsession. But even things that there's a Polish film on Netflix. It's called 1640, I think. It's about medieval times. It's a comedy. It's a film. It's a series. Very, very popular. And even some of those clips that I see on social media, some of them are coming up with, you must have age verification for this. And I was like, no, something's gone wrong here. But just as an example.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, this is one of the main concerns with the whole age verification process is what's to say it's not expanded to all online services. I think it's unlikely, and I think it's worth, being conscious of the fact that the UK government and other governments their intentions are in the right place to try and prevent harmful content being easily accessible to children. It's just that the way in which they've gone about it doesn't quite add up right now.
So, Mr. VPN global expert, if you had the chance to create the law, what would you do it? Would you do it that zero knowledge system, or would you do something else?
I think definitely using something that differentiates and compartmentalizes people's data, so that it's not all sitting in one very kind of sensitive database, which would be an obvious target. So as much separation and as anonymization as possible. But I think that wherever this process happens, it's going to ultimately increase the risk of putting people's sensitive data at risk. It's inherent within the process of gathering and collecting that data in the first place. So all measures have to kind of take that into account and mitigate as best they can from those risks.
Well, that was Sam Woodhams, VPN Managing Editor at TechRadar. If you would like to hear more from both guests, including how governments may now be tracking our VPN use, then please subscribe to the podcast extra version of the show. For just $10 a month, you'll get a little extra soap every week. Just search for Somewhere on Earth, the Global Tech Podcast, and add the words pod.fan. Our sponsors are Roost and Sazience, and we are part of the Evergreen Podcast Network. Our production manager is Liz Toohey, and I am the editor of the show. We're off to warmer places soon, so look out for our special shows from Lisbon over the coming weeks. For now, though, goodbye.